Hello, Algebra 1 students. This is Mr. Schuessler again, and welcome to our lesson on relations. So our lesson objectives for today are representing relations and interpreting graphs of relations. So go ahead and put those down in your notes under your lesson objectives section. These can also be found on PowerSchool Learning. So what is a relation? Think about it. A relation is a set of ordered pairs. But first, what is an ordered pair? So an ordered pair is a set of numbers or coordinates written in the form x, y. So for example, we have this point. Each point on a coordinate plane is named by ordered pair. So the way we find a point on a coordinate plane is through its ordered pair. So for example, the origin is the special point on a coordinate plane, and that is where the ordered pair is 0, 0. But this point here is 2, 3, meaning on the horizontal axis, which is also called the x-axis, it goes over 2 points, so 1, 2. And then on the vertical axis, which is also called the y-axis, we go up 3, 1, 2, 3. And so this point is 2, 3. Now there are many ways to represent relations. For example, we can do it through ordered pairs. We can do it through a table. So for these ordered pairs, we have an x table and an x column and a y column. Often you'll see them on a graph or a coordinate plane. So we have the first point, 1, 2 on this point. The second one, -2, 4. And 0, 3 is down here. We can also represent it through what's called mapping, where we have our domain and range. I will talk about that in the next slide. But basically, we have the domain on one side and the range on the other. And for every point on the domain, we map it to a range point. Each representation of the same relation serves a different purpose. For example, graphing the points can show the pattern between 2 points. Or mapping can show you at a glance if the elements are paired with a different element. So here we can see that each element in the domain is paired with 1 in the range. There's no overlapping to different range points. Now let's talk about domain and range. These are very important vocabulary words that you're going to need to remember. Domain and range. So domain, what does domain refer to? Domain refers to the x coordinates, while range refers to the y coordinates. So make sure you have these definitions down in your notes. We're going to be working with them a fair bit. So now let's express these numbers as a table, a graph, and a mapping. So first we have 2, 5. So 2 is going to be the domain. So we're going to put that in the x coordinate on the table. And then we have 5, which goes in the y. -2, 3, 5, -2, -1, -2. Make sure you are pausing this video and including all of these into your notes. Now let's move on to putting these points on a coordinate plane or graphing them. So first we have 2, 5. So 2 represents the domain, which is the x coordinate. So we go over 2, 1, 2. And then our y is our vertical, our range is 5. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we end up with this point. 2, 5. The next one, -2, 3. Again, -2, and then up 3. Then we have 5, -2. So we're going to go over 5 and down to -2. And -1, -2. Next, we need to map them. So let's do this. So we have our domain and our range. So we are going to put in our domain our x values. 2, -2, 5, and -1. In our range, we're going to put our y values, which are 5, 3, -2. And since we have -2 twice, we can just put that in once. So now let's map them. So for 2, it goes towards 5. For -2, it goes to 3. 5 goes to -2. And -1 also goes to -2. So we can see by representing the data this way, very quickly with the mapping, that there are 2 domain elements that correspond with -2 in the range section. A way to help you remember the domain and range. Remember, in the alphabet, X comes before Y. Domain comes before range. So in your notes, use this fact to describe a method for remembering how to write the ordered pairs. So you can go ahead and write something that's going to help you remember domain and range. Next, we're going to talk about independent and dependent variables. So the domain, the value of the variable that determines the output, is the independent variable, which is why we always put time in the domain, because time is always the independent variable. So time always goes on the horizontal axis, which is the x-axis. The range is the variable with a value that is dependent on the value of the independent variable, and it is called the dependent variable. So that goes on the x-axis, the vertical axis. So here's a few examples that we will walk through. Let's try them together. So the dance committee is selling tickets to the fall ball. The more tickets they sell, the greater amount of money they can spend for decorations. So what is the independent and the dependent variable? Go ahead and look at this yourself and try to solve it. You'll notice that we have the independent is the number of tickets. And the dependent is the amount of money they can spend for decorations. So those are the independent and the dependent. Now let's look at the bottom one. In Hong Kong, the average amount of electricity rises as the daily average temperature increases and falls as the daily average temperature decreases. Identify the independent and dependent variables. Again, write these in your notes. This is a good example. So again, we have our independent All right, our independent is the average daily temperature. And our dependent is the average amount of electricity, because as the daily temperature increases, the dependent variable increases as well. So the amount of electricity we use is dependent on the daily average temperature. One final thing that we want to look at about relations today is interpreting graphs of a relation. So Mr. Schuessler went for a bike ride this weekend to Tai Po. A distance time graph of his trip is below. So go ahead and copy this graph into your notes and then take a minute to describe what is happening, and also what is happening when the line is horizontal. So now that you've taken the time, let's go through this together. So let's describe what's happening. So Mr. Schuessler started, and then he was going at a steady pace, a steady distance away. So he was biking along, and then it looks like he got tired because his distance was no longer increasing, but the time is always moving. And so he took a break. So what was happening when the line was horizontal is Mr. Schuessler was not biking anywhere. He had stopped to take a break. And then he carried on again. In this graph, time is the independent variable and the distance is the dependent variable. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please rewatch this video. I know there was a lot of vocabulary terms that I introduced today, so please make sure that you have a good understanding of them, especially domain and range. Thank you for listening. One final thing, if you have not, please submit a PDF of your notes. Pause this video for the instructions and do that. This was due last class, so make sure that this is done. Thank you for listening and participating today.